Should I get my child a smartphone? Should I get my child a smartphone? That is a very good question, and one that parents usually have to deal with a little bit earlier than what they think they're going to have to. With regard to what age kids should be when they get a smartphone, a lot of parents do want to push it out for as long as they possibly can, and this is completely understandable. But one of the main problems is that if parents want to push out the time that they're going to give their child a phone, they tend to lose a little bit of power when that starts to happen. So it can be very advisable to actually give your child a smartphone a little bit earlier than perhaps what you'd had hoped for, but put some really strong boundaries and some really strong rules in place. You can take control over exactly what your child is doing and when they have access to that phone if you start a little bit earlier. Parents often feel like it's all or nothing. So they feel like they either have to give their child a smartphone and that's the be all and end all, and that is simply not true. And parents need to know that if you give your child a smartphone, you can take it back at any point in time. You can give your child a smartphone, but it's really important to set up having boundaries and time schedules. So perhaps that means that they get access to that phone on a Monday between 4 and 5 p.m, but on Tuesdays, they don't have access to it. It's about creating an environment where there's an ease into having a smartphone. It is not completely black and white that they either have it or they don't. 14 is a little bit old, in fact. Most children will have phones by the time that they're 14, largely because parents do want to give kids that age access to a phone because they might be walking to school and therefore they need some sort of safety mechanism. So it's pretty typical that a child at 14 would have access to a phone. The problem is at 14, we know that teenagers start to become more independent and they seek a little bit of space from their parents, which means that if a parent allows access at 14, it's harder for a parent to necessarily take control. My recommendation in terms of giving a child access to a phone would be to start that access around the age of 10 or 11. Keeping in mind that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to just give your 10-year-old a phone and then they can take it to bed and play on it at 1 a.m. It's about giving them access initially. And when you give them access, you're letting them know what your boundaries and expectations are around that use. What is positive online behaviour? What is balanced use? Then you take it off them later and you give it again when they do a good job. Starting earlier for parents also decreases the distress and the fear that parents also feel. Because by the time that kids are 14, we know that they're online, they're interacting with people that perhaps parents don't actually know from the high school that they go to, they're using social media, and then parents feel very anxious about what can I do to keep up to date and how do I check everything? Because by 14, teenagers often know how to hide their behaviours from parents. If you start a little bit younger and your child is just edging into the online world and the world of technology, it also means that parents get given an opportunity where you can learn about technology too, which makes it more comfortable for you when they start to become more immersed in more games and more social media, that you've got a bit of a feel about what it's actually about. So starting earlier benefits the child, but it also benefits the parent, as long as you've got some boundaries and controls in place to make sure that that technology use is safe. Factors that parents often need to consider before they buy the child the phone is, firstly, does it have access to the internet? Because the internet is what opens up that child to a whole load of fun, but also a whole lot of risks. And that's what you need to be aware of first and foremost. Keeping in mind that a lot of parents think that if I don't buy data for my child, therefore they're not connected to the internet. And given that there's a large amount of Wi-Fi hotspots all over the place, it does mean that kids can have access to Wi-Fi at certain times. So it's not just about whether you've given them data, but it's also about whether that device can connect to the internet. And if it can, you still need to be aware that they might be exposed to online risks. It's important for parents to remember that kids are still kids and they're learning about this kind of information as they go, as are parents a lot of the time. So in terms of responsibility, we want to instill within children a sense of responsibility about their device, but also about their online behaviours, what they're doing, what they're sharing, how they're interacting with other people. But kids will not just learn that just off the top of their head. They don't necessarily learn it at school too much either, not in specific regard to technology use. We as parents need to be standing by them and guiding what is responsible behaviour. and helping them develop that. And we can only do that if we, A, allow them to have access to technology, but we're also helping them with it and building a relationship with our child around their technology use. Parents do ask me quite a lot, should I get my child to pay for their own phone? Should I pay for their own plan? On the one hand, because they're expensive devices, there is an opportunity if a child does pay for their own device that you're teaching them about savings and having responsibility and ownership over a phone. And whilst that is positive, this is one specific context that I would encourage parents to pay for the bill, to pay for the phone. The reason being is that because these things can get out of hand very quickly, parents need leverage in this domain. So if you're paying for the phone bill and your child's not really coming to the plate about some of the rules that you're put in place about their technology use, your leveraging point then can be, I'm going to stop paying for the bill. So that gives you some extra power. First of all, never ever give your child a phone, irrespective of age, whether they're young or old, a phone as it is, because that is a minefield. All phones and devices are made for adults, and the minute that something is connected to the internet, you're giving that child access to anything you can possibly think of that an adult might think, and that's not always a good thing. Secondly, you should never give your child a device without making it very clear what your expectations are in terms of their behaviour, and letting them know that if they do break some of these rules, that there will be consequences, because their behaviour does need to be guided. We're trying to create positive adults here who have responsible use. There will be mistakes that are made, and that's actually really okay. Teenagers, children, they will make mistakes. But having consequences helps guide that behaviour back to where we need it to be. So, restrictions, rules, two of the fundamental things that need to go hand in hand with giving that child the device initially.